Well, hey everybody, I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So glad that you have taken the time to be with us on this call with Bill Willits. We're going to talk about taking our small groups online. We're used to meeting in lounges, but what's it like to meet over a Zoom call or any other method? So we're really glad to have Bill Willits here. Bill was one of the founding staff members of North Point Community Church with Andy Stanley. So, Bill, how are you isolating? How's quarantine life for you?
You know, we've been fairly responsible. I'll say that. For those of you who know me, I'll push the boundaries a little bit and get out. But I love the fact that here in Atlanta, we're actually moving into spring, so the temperatures are nice, so that we can go out for evening walks and make the most of it. So that's been great. But I feel a little cooped up. I'm getting a ton done, but I'm ready to push the boundaries a little bit.
Fabulous. Yeah. I feel like I'm 16 again, Bill. You know, when mum and dad locked you down and said you couldn't go out, you know, it feels like I'm grounded all over again in my bedroom, which is where I am now. In fact, I'm in my 17-year-old son's bedroom because it's the only quiet place I could find in the house, and it is disgusting in here. I'm not going to turn the camera around because it is disgusting. I had to have an inoculation to get in here, and if this was smelly vision, you'd know exactly what I meant. But I thought you'd appreciate the London bus on the wall as well, Bill.
I do. I feel home.
Fabulous. Well, let's dive into the content. We've got an hour together, and there's so many questions that I've got to that I want to ask you. And listen, everybody, if you want to ask Bill a question, please drop it in the chat. As you see at the bottom of your screen, a little button that says chat. Click on that, and you can ask away. And hopefully, we can get to as many of those questions as possible. Bill, let me kick off with this. Sure. It must have been about 10 years ago when I first walked into North Point Community Church, and I remember distinctly Andy Stanley talking about circles, groups, people sat around in a lounge are actually better than people sat in a row on a Sunday. And he said this, he said, you know what? He said, if you took all our buildings away, it wouldn't stop our church would still be going. Well, hey, they have taken your building away. So how's it going? Is church still going for you?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. The church has always been more than a building, hasn't it? It's always been about a unique group of people who have come together around a common vision. And so the fact that we're having to be creative in how we gather these days, and we're doing it digitally rather than in person, is a challenge initially for sure, but it's also a phenomenal opportunity. And can you imagine if we had gone through this pandemic 15 years ago and the lack of technological advances that weren't available back in those days, 15, 20 years ago, we would not be able to do what we're doing today. So while there are challenges, certainly, and while we love to gather as a body corporately, boy, this is just a great opportunity for us to be able to engage people in a way that they've never been able to be engaged. And we're finding that we're being able to reach and connect with some people that honestly, in the good days, they're not as interested. But these days, they're sitting up straight, they're paying a little bit more attention, and they realize there is a God, but it's not them, right? And so that's a good thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine how we would have got through church 15 years ago trying to do it on a Nokia 3310. It just feels like it wouldn't have worked at all.
Probably not.
So what are the challenges that you're facing in terms of trying to do groups online and church online?
Yes, so there was two things that we really tried to pay attention to early on when we realized, okay, this is not going to be China's issue. This is going to be a worldwide issue. Oh, it's going to be an Atlanta issue. It's going to be very close to home. Our two challenges really, one was tactical and one was pastoral. You know, tactically, how do we meaningfully connect people and actually get them up to speed in terms of how to use some of the various digital formats that are out there? So we had to scurry pretty quick and find out what was available, and we created cheat sheets. And Duncan, what I'll do is some of the things I'm going to reference, I'll send to you separately, and if you want to send them out to the group, happy to do that. But there's some tips that we created for meeting digitally. We gave about 4 different platforms to use. Zoom is a great platform. Their free version, though, kicks out at 40 minutes. And so unless you have a professional version that costs, the free version kicks you out of the nest in 40 minutes. And so we just had to create some very tactical guidelines for people who are trying to connect digitally. And so we did that. How do you actually have group in a 60 to 90 minute meeting that doesn't come across very wooden and artificial? And then what are just some of the simple tips to follow when you are meeting digitally? And some of those have been out there for years that corporations have been using. So that was some of the first things that we did. Tactically, what are the best practices that we need to apply? Then we started thinking through pastorally, what are people going to be needing in this time? And I love the fact that even though this pandemic is new to us, and it's certainly new to the world, probably certainly gotten global attention more than anything in the last 100 years, the church has had to deal with pandemics before. And so it was great. And let me see if I can do this real quick on share a screen. Okay, you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Martin Luther was answering the question back in the bubonic plague of 14th century. How do I protect myself and my family without abdicating my responsibility to love my neighbor as I've been called to do by Jesus? And I love the fact that in church history, we see a church leader addressing some of the same issues that we're having to address. He said, therefore, I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. And then practically, I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed in order not to become contaminated and thus perchance infect and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. I mean, he was practicing social distancing, right? Back before it was even a term. And then, if God shall wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I have done what he has expected of me. And so I'm not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. But if my neighbor needs me, boy, this is a great point. However, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith because it neither is brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God. So basically what he said, and I have it in the summary statements down there, he prayed for mercy while acting benevolently. He was available, but not careless, and he trusted God and loved his neighbor as he was called to do at the same time. So we can do this. We are doing this, right? And I think, but it's encouraging. I'll have another quote. I won't reference it right now, but C.S. Lewis during World War II. So great. I mean, post-World War II, I should say, when the atomic bomb was a thing and we're living in the atomic age, and what do? And I love the fact that he got to this point. He said, I hope that, death, he's talking about death is a certainty. But then he says, I hope if death finds us, that when it comes, it will find us doing sensible and human things like praying and working and teaching and reading and listening to music, taking care of children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint in a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep thinking about bombs. I love the fact that previously the church has had to deal with difficult times, and it gives us a pathway. So I think there's some spiritual needs, and we try to break those down emotionally. What are some of the resources that people need in this time as they deal with the stress and the anxiety and the impact of something that is so unknown and been so foreign to us? And there's going to be one article in here by Tim Elmore, who leads an organization called Grow Leaders, that I really want to draw your attention to, because he talks about how different personalities and different people will respond to pandemics different ways. For some of us, it's kind of like, well, what's the big deal? I mean, we've had the flu before, it'll come, it'll go, we'll move on with our lives. But there's other people, this is like a hurricane for them, and they are frozen. And it's just taking into account that people are emotionally, based on wiring, based on history, are going to respond to this in different ways. And so if we're going to pastorally respond effectively, then we need to take those things into account.
Bill,
And,
can I just
and
let me just push? Can I
yeah,
just push you on that? I mean, those
yeah,
two quotes, 600 years ago and 60, 70 years ago, they could have been written today, as you say. It's quite incredible, especially the C.S. Lewis notion. I think it's
right.
incredible. But how do we know? We're great as leaders, aren't we? We're great at presuming we know what people's needs are in our groups. But how have you gone about actually figuring that out, rather than just second guessing what the needs are of people who are in our churches and in our communities?
Well, and again, some of it is guesswork. But again, what are the underlying issues that come up as a result of things that are out of our control? Well, anxiety, stress, depression. There are financial issues that come up. And so one of the things that we tried to do is to create resources and address needs based on those issues. Like for one thing, we created a worksheet from our care network that really deals with a lot of links to how do you manage anxiety and stress in uncertain times. And so we came up with 6 healthy tips to help you cope during COVID-19. One of the things I'm going to reference, I think a little bit later, is Henry Cloud, who noted author, is doing a leader check-in with a different organization, and it's a 17-minute video clip. Is one of the best things that I have heard, but he's dealing with some of the simple, practical, psychological issues that people are dealing with. He deals with the spiritual side of the equation, but he also deals it from a human side of the equation in terms of what people are experiencing and feeling. And simple things like creating a routine and staying connected to others and to your community, and staying engaged exercise-wise, and just doing simple things that are keeping you in a rhythm rather than allowing life to overwhelm us. And then when it gets too big, what do? And so we've created some, go-to pages for some pastoral staff or outside counseling or articles. And so they're all links that we created to help people emotionally walk through this, recognizing, again, for some, this is going to be bigger than life. For some of our kids, especially, who have been tooling along in school, and all of a sudden that gets shut down and everybody goes home, we are finding that there is and again, I don't know what you guys are seeing, but we're finding that there has been a heightened rise of anxiety and stress and depression. We've even had been hit by this with one of our own staff, and have seen suicide on the upward ticks. Just tragic, because for some, this is bigger than life. And the idea of when our leaders said we're shutting everything down for the foreseeable future, it was a trigger for some personalities and for some who are dealing with some stress and anxiety issues already, that some of us can't relate to, we can't fully appreciate, but is very real. So again, there are a myriad of issues. How do we address those? So we created those emotional relief resources and made those available for our leaders to be able to share with their group members. And then
I
we
love
created,
that, Bill.
yeah.
Just to encourage everybody who's listening to Bill there, to be on the front foot as a church and say, look, we understand, we're with you, we're all suffering this, and here are some things that I think you might find helpful. To be practical like that, and to give it to leaders so they can help their teams and help their groups, is just brilliant. And we should think about that. Stuff like this is amazing.
Yeah, here's the actual document. And so that'll be in a packet that we'll make sure that is available to you guys. Then we started paying attention to the fact that there is not just going to be, let me make sure this is right. There's financial issues. And, you know, there are people who are, we've lost 22 million jobs. And literally, I was talking with somebody 6 weeks ago, we added 273,000 jobs to the economy. And in 6 weeks, we've lost 22 million in rising.
Wow.
So there are people who are dealing with real-time issues when it comes to paying bills. And so again, we created a worksheet for people, and it's on our websites, basically under 2 headings on the homepage: need help, want to give help, and how do you engage in the community, and if you need help emotionally or financially. And so we created these, and then some of these documents, and then what are some of the national relief measures that are effective. And of course, we passed here in the States a financial package where people can file for unemployment, extended unemployment. And so how do you do that? And then what are some of the local agencies that we support through Be Rich and other initiatives if they have rent issues or utility issues or those kinds of things. So again, practically, pastorally, just helping address people with their simple needs is basically saying, in a time of a pandemic, we care and we want to help.
Bill, that's amazing. That's a challenge to all of us, actually. And there's no, you know, there's no reason why we can't get things like that together and use these documents that you've kindly given to us as a template and to put our own material into that. So I'll make sure everybody gets that. Again, if you've got any questions for Bill, please drop them in the chat. Bottom of the screen, you'll see the chat facility, and I'll make sure that we drop those into Bill as well. Let me push you on along a little bit further, Bill.
Yep.
In terms of creating community, we know how to do that. We're all here on this call because we're passionate about small groups. We believe that life is better connected. We believe that it's better to be in a circle than it is to be in a row. And we know how to create community when people are sat with a cup of coffee on our sofa and we can do life together. How do you do that on a Zoom call? How do you do that in a Google Hangout? Or how do you create genuine connection? Because I don't know what it's like in America, but for us, I think we could be locked down, not just for 4 weeks or 8 weeks, but you know, the way our government are talking, we could be like this until Christmas. So how are we going to create a genuine sense of sticky community when we're trying to do it over the internet?
Well, and I will just, let me start by saying, Duncan, I think we're going to learn some things over the next weeks and months that are going to help us in ways that it'll change the way we do community, I think, for years. It'll enhance it. It won't substitute for embodied community, but I think it'll give us some enhancement tools that will be phenomenal. And I would just say real quickly, it's different. So we've got to do 2 things for sure. We got to make it simple and we got to keep it personal. Those 2 things. And by when I say make it simple, I mean, there are just a few things that you just got to do to keep those relational, that relational momentum in any group happening. And the first is connecting regularly. So we created, that's why we created some simple tips for people to digitally engage. So how do you do that meaningfully? So we, you know, as simple as sitting close to the screen, making sure you have good lighting, avoid eating in the middle of a group session, mute when you're not speaking, try to avoid potential distractions, the TV or the music in the background, or if you have a pet, you know, try to put them away for the time of group. But again, some people they're living life at home, and so they have all these natural distractions and they're not paying attention to what some of those things are. But when I say make it simply, you know, there's some great tips to follow but it's about connecting regularly, and then sharing openly. I mean, our group is meeting every week, and we haven't stopped meeting every week except for 1 week, which we did upon agreement. Some groups meet every a couple of weeks. Some groups meet 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Whatever the rhythm is, I would just maintain the rhythm, so that the frequency of connection is continuing. But I think the rules change. You just don't jump in and say, okay, we ended in Ephesians 2, let's move on to Ephesians 3. Because people's lives have been upset. They are upside down. And so early on, we not only wanted to make sure we were connecting regularly, but that the sharing that was being done was real, authentic. We have 3 people in our group, 3 families that are in the event business. And one of them does corporate events. One is Wimbledon. One's the French Open.
Oh, wow.
One's the Olympics.
Wow.
Guess what they're not doing?
Yeah.
Really anything. In fact, they're trying to save their company at this point because everything has been turned upside down. We've got one guy who does corporate events on a smaller scale, but they're more training events. All of those have been shut down. And so their futures are in question. So if we just bulldoze through towards our curriculum as usual, you talk about being tone deaf. You talk about being insensitive to the needs of the people in the group. So we just wanted to make sure that we were paying attention to the temperature of what was happening in people's lives early on. So rather than moving to curriculum, we wanted to make sure we engaged and connected meaningfully and really assess the temperature of what was going to. So I remember our first group, we said, okay, what are some of the go-to verses of scripture for you whenever you're going through a trial or a tough time? And that was our study for the night. And people shared meaningfully because they had already been interfacing with the scriptures like Psalm 121 or Psalm 91, Psalm 35. Now, again, the Psalms are perfect go-to in times like this because not everything had a bow on it back in David's time. And so he emotionally shared openly and then came back to the fact, but in my God, I trust. And that's what we have to be reminded is emotionally share what's real. Let's keep that open. And then let's be reminders to each other about what we know to be true is that, the reality, control's an illusion, right? We found that out. God's in control. It is he, and we are not he. And so as a result, just paying attention. So, I mean, we've tried to make it very simple and said, connect regularly, share openly, and then pray honestly. That's the one. For those of you who are really concerned about the future, we get it. So let's pray actively for one another and be the body in these times, reminding each other. I love C.S. Lewis's quote, people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. And if there's ever a time like today, boy, are those words true. People need to be reminded of who God is and what he's done in the past for each of us, and that he hasn't forgotten us, nor will he forsake us. And we've had staff members who have been impacted by coronavirus. And so it's very near to us, and thankfully they're on recovery. But, I just think we have to make sure that we keep it simple and then we keep it personal. And I like the saying, my wife has always said this, let's make sure we connect before we direct. That's and I good. Think in group life, that's really important right now, is let's make sure we connect and assess where people are, how the pandemic has affected them personally, their jobs, their lives, before we try to direct them and put a bow on whatever they may be dealing with.
I love what you're saying there, but I think often as teachers, as leaders, we move to curriculum or content.
That's
And
right.
actually what people want more than anything else is connection. And if we can lean into that and not worry so much that we haven't gone through all the verses of Ephesians 2, but we've had a sense of connection with people, then I think we're winning. Have you noticed that the length of these online small groups in terms of the Zoom meeting or the Hangout has changed? I know, tonight's my group with my guys, and we used to get together and have a meal together, and we'd be together from sort of 7 in the evening till 11 o'clock at night. And yet now, when we're just on our phones, sat in our back bedroom somewhere, about an hour is about right.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there will be some days, depending on what the presenting temperature is in the room, it could be a little less, it could be a little bit more. And I just think, pay attention to the temperature in the room. But I totally agree. An hour where we might go 90 minutes before, 60 to 70 minutes tends to be the norm. We've been we've been 45 minutes before. I just think paying attention, but I think anything shorter videos, shorter series, is paying attention to where people's attention spans are. That's why I love in setups like Zoom and other formats that they have the share screen piece, so you can actually share the video pieces that you have with the group. I like sending links before the group meeting so that they can watch a video and then we can discuss it beforehand, but trying everything to be in that 15 to 20 minute time frame, so it just doesn't dominate what's happening. If there's ever a time that less is more, my gosh, this is the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. So connection is the priority. But I think, I've certainly noticed with my group that we've talked endlessly about how COVID has affected our lives and our families and our jobs and everything else. And it's almost like now we're looking for some content. It's almost like we want to, push into learning more and studying more and discovering more. But one of the things that hasn't worked so well is oftentimes in group we'll watch a half an hour talk, we'll watch a half an hour video. That kind of doesn't work online. I mean, you referenced the Henry Cloud 17-minute one, but how do you deliver content in a group online that works better than if you were sat on the sofa? I love the idea of sending the link out and saying, watch it before we get there. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and I think that's generally what works best, unless less than 15 minutes is ideal. But again, if we lead with that curriculum, or we as leaders are driving towards a direction and not paying attention to what the temperature is in the room, that's going to come back and bite us. We've created a page that highlights some of the unique resources. It's groupleaders.org, and /curriculum gives curriculum options that are 1 and 2 weeks old. So when I say short, I don't mean just short in length. I mean short in duration too, because everything is moving and changing. And so we tried to pay attention to that. We've got another link on groupleaders.org that is /leader-resources. And that has everything from the digital tips to some of the care resources that I was talking about earlier, to some curriculum options for people to look at for their groups in times like this. And I agree with you. We're at the place now that we're ready to move past pandemic language and move back into substantive conversations. And a lot of that for us right now is around sermon conversations around the sermon questions that have been created from Sunday. So again, not what we would necessarily always do every week in our group, but Andy's doing some great teaching around basically what do you do when things are out of control.
Yeah.
And so that has been great, great fodder for us in group. I think one of the most important things that that we've kind of learned as we're going through this is just make sure that as a leader, I want to drive to check the box that I got done with the study. And I just got to make sure to resist that at all times, so that we are sharing, we are doing some study, but we're also praying fervently, because that's one of the things that we want to make sure, because the needs are real and people's jobs being lost is front and center. And so how do we be the body to one another in those times?
Yeah, I've put some of those links that you talked about in the in the chat. So the groupleaders.org, there's loads of stuff there that I think you'll find very helpful, and it's free, so you can download that. Just pushing the conversation in a different way. How it's interesting, isn't it? Because like I said right at the start, Andy Stanley said, if you take all our buildings away, you haven't ruined our church, because the church is more than just what happens on a Sunday. And that's happened. The buildings have been taken away. And some of us have been great. It's worked great because everyone's in circles. Other churches I've talked to, people are saying, but we only had 20-25% of our people in a circle, in a group. Mm-hmm. So how do we start connecting people now? Now we can't even encourage them and stand in front on a stage and say, come on, get yourself in a group. How do we connect people into an online group who've never been in a group before? How do we cast vision for that and get people into those groups? And also, if we can get them into those groups, the day will come when we're going to be meeting on sofas and back in people's lounges and kitchens again. How do we get them to stick beyond the digital group into the physical world?
Yeah, great questions and things we're wrestling with. And let me be the first to tell you, we're wrestling with you. We're in the trenches with you. We haven't figured all of this out, but let me give you 3 suggestions that we're doing right now. One is we checked our database against everyone who is disconnected. So who's not in a group. And so we've done some direct marketing for people who are not in the group to make sure that they have an opportunity to be in one of our short-term group, digital short-term group options. And they're really taking on 3 different approaches. One is a 1 week, what we're calling, inviting people to, is a conversation about Sunday's message. We have resisted using the term group because for some people, the idea of group is a bad experience that they had in university and they never want to go back to that again. And so we've tried to pay attention and say, okay, there's a certain group who are loners or who had bad experiences that we just have to market differently. And so we've invited them to 1 week conversation digitally around the Sunday message. For others, we've invited them to a short-term group using a series that Andy did back when there was the financial crisis of 2009 called In the Meantime. And it was a 3 or 4 week, it was a 5-week series. And I think we've shaved it down to 4. But invited them to this 4 or 5 week experience for those who are for those who are disconnected from a group. And then we are also offering the 3rd option, which is a short-term group using one of our care network resources. If you go to YouTube, and on YouTube, North Point Care Network, you'll see a number of resources, videos that have been created that are snippets. I mean, they're short. A couple of them are pretty long, but they're using a couple on anxiety and stress as really bait to get people to connect digitally. And our hope is that through these experiences that there will be a taste and see that group is good. And as a result, when it is time to do our primary connection opportunities, which for us are in the fall and first of the year, that they'll take advantage of that. We hope some of these digital groups will continue. It would not surprise me, Duncan, if we find that we're going to have some people who have connected digitally and they end up staying connected digitally and meet digitally, and then once a month come together for embodied community, for a meal, for something else.
Yeah.
For us, it's a 35, 40-minute drive to some of our small group members' homes. And so I could see us not giving up at all embodied community, but supplementing maybe the frequency of what we're doing live and what we do digitally, because it's been that good for us. And so those are just some ideas. We've also directed people who contact our website. And we've had folks who are realizing, gosh, I need to pay attention a little bit more to a faith element. And so we've created some short-term starting point groups where people have actually, it's our version of Alpha, where people have gotten into digital starting point groups to explore faith. And so some of those are happening right now, which is pretty exciting because, again, this pandemic has created unanswered questions in their mind. And so they're very ripe to open up and to talk about those things.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the starting point groups, which is your version of Alpha, as you say, they're great. And I know you've used Facebook ads, haven't you, Bill, to try and get people to connect into those groups. And I don't know why, as churches, we don't use Facebook marketing more, because you can be so targeted, and it's pennies. It's not expensive at all, literally pennies. And you can specifically target ages and stages of life and locality and be really, really specific about it. And you get a good return for it. So I would encourage you to think about Facebook marketing, and especially around Alpha or Starting Point, which is a great kind of launch into the Christian faith as well. And in terms of that In the Meantime series, I noticed Chris in the chat has said In the Meantime's a fabulous series. We've done it at our church. It was really helpful to lots of people. For those of you who are part of our Further Faster network, all these series that Andy does, they're all free. If you're part of the network, we can get them to you. You can go onto our partner site and just download all the assets that go with it. All the scripts, all the videos, all the artwork, all the transcripts, all the notes, all the small group materials. It's all there. It's all free. But lots of people on this call today aren't partners, but I'm prepared to give you that In the Meantime series for free. If you want all those assets, just email me and I'll make sure that I'll put some stuff into a Dropbox folder, and you can go away and have that and enjoy that and use it with your groups or use it on a Sunday. So email me, say, I'd love that In the Meantime series, and I'll make sure you get hold of that. Bill, let me push it on to another question, if I may. My friend Jim's asked this question. Just thinking about leaders in groups, how are you supporting them? What are you doing to direct leaders in terms of how they should be performing as a leader with their small group right now? And how are you supporting them and encouraging them and cheering them on along the way? Because a lot's falling on them right now.
It's huge. They're really becoming the frontline pastors for many times for us. Let me see if I can share one other document with you. So early on, this is kind of the focus document we created for our staff and for our leaders. Group directors are basically coaches of leaders. So we kind of gave some focused attention of what we were doing. And one of the things we said early on is we got to be personal. We got to be responsive personally to the needs of our leaders, because they really are shepherding a myriad of different needs in their groups. So we said, whether it's been through digital huddles or gatherings, leader gatherings, or personal calls, notes, we have asked our group directors or coaches to provide a personal touch point to leaders every couple of weeks, and they've been doing that. I might add, 91% of our groups are still meeting. And so one of the questions was, would they meet digitally? And again, the question is, how effective could we be at enabling them to meet digitally? And so that was kind of the focus, is getting everybody up and running. But we want to keep those live and digital connections. So we're making calls. We're just trying to stay very available to what the leaders need so that they can be responsive to the members. For our group leaders, we ask them to continue to meet, to prioritize relational connection and ministry over content, especially in the beginning of this pandemic. Group leaders will connect with their group's directors for support and best practices. And then one of the things that I really tried to make a focused piece, and it's so easy for us to say, yeah, pray for your leaders and pray for your group members. And then we do this, this broad brush 10-second prayer. And we just committed to saying, no, let's pray meaningfully for the needs that we know about when it comes to our leaders with their members, or us as coaches with our leaders, to make sure that we are pastoring the pastors, as I like to say, in the midst of this thing. So creating those touch points has been really important for us to be able to shepherd and to pastor well in the midst of this pandemic. You can't impart, I had a seminary professor said this years ago, you can't impart what you don't possess. And so if I have not received something from my leader, I may not be as apt to give it away. And so we're just, again, trying to make sure that we're filling people's cups as much as we can, recognizing we'll never fully be there, but we can be helpful in the process.
That's great. Listen, I want to get to the questions that you guys have got who are listening to this as well. So please, there's a chat button on the bottom of the screen. Just drop your question in there. I've got a couple more for Bill, and then I want to get to some of the questions that you guys might have. So fire away on those. How does North Point cast vision for group life? I mean, you have in terms of your attendance, you have quite a high percentage of people in group, and you work really hard to get people into group. Really hard, harder than any other church. I mean, it feels to me like everything you do is pointing people. Everything you do, if I turned up to your church for the first time, everything you do is to try and get me around the kitchen table, to get me into a group with other people, because you honestly believe that life is better connected. But how do you go about casting vision? How do ordinary people know that that's part of your DNA in your church?
We're very intentional about a couple of things. One, it's one of our stated values. So as an organization, and I understand values can be statements on the wall and not really be happening inside the church. But early on, we said, okay, authentic community is one of the core values of our organization, that we want people. We say life is better connected because connected people go further, faster. There you go. Hey. And so what we're hoping happens is that we are helping expedite the process of spiritual formation in the lives of people as they connect together. And so a couple of times a year, we do dedicated message series around community life, around getting into a group in order to advertise group life for our churches. And then we direct them to our connection events at the start of the school year and the start of the calendar year for us. And those are the two big times that we'll do messages. But we usually take one of three angles. We take a spiritual angle and use something like Hebrews 10:25. Don't give up meeting together as the habit of some, but encourage one another as long as the day. We like to say you won't grow spiritually unless you're connected relationally. And so we try to, again, use scriptural text, which we think that's a very scriptural message. Nobody stays in the game spiritually long-term without other people investing into them on a regular basis. We're not, it's a team sport, as I like to say. So we take a spiritual angle, we take a care angle, sometimes when tragic has happened, and tell the story of what somebody in our community, and we'll do videos around them, or allow them to share what's actually happened as a result of their community. coming together and being the hands and feet of Jesus in the midst of their greatest need. So we'll take a care angle. And the third is sometimes we will take a relational angle. We'll take things like Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but the companion of fools suffers for it. Well, we'll take different passages, and I've gotten to the place now where I can go back 10 years and say, oh, we've done spiritual angle X amount of times. Last year, we might have done a relational angle. This is the year to take a care angle, so that we're keeping it fresh and we're looking at it in a different way. But I should also say is that throughout the year, we're making sure that we're trying to find opportunities where we can leverage stories of community life, whether it's in our own groups, and Andy talks about it from his own group, or whether it is a story we hear, and make sure that we're sharing those as part of a message series and just reminding people life really is better than nothing.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed when I've been to your church, often in our churches, we would have a baptism service maybe once or twice a year. It just seems to me every time I come to North Point, someone's getting baptized. People get saved, people get baptized on a fairly regular basis. And every time I've seen a baptism, there's always tears in my eyes. And every time they talk about their group, every time they might well talk about a message Andy gave or a friend that brought them to church. But the thing that's pushed them over the edge, the thing that's given them the support they need is their group. Group is you mainline it into the service when people get saved and get baptized. And beyond just the couple of times a year when you do a message or a series. And I think we need to do that more often, to not just say to people, get into a group, it's important, but tell a real story of someone who says, group life meant everything to me. And I'm getting baptized today to demonstrate that. Another question, Bill, from Rob. He said, would you suggest that, talking about online groups, would you offer short-term groups rather than longer-term groups when it comes to digital groups at the moment?
I would, especially for those who are disconnected, because again, we want to keep them longing, not loathing, right? And so giving them manageable, bite-sized opportunities, I am more apt to say yes to a 4 to 6 week experience than I am to a 6 month or a year experience. And so again, making it an easy ask, an easy step, and with the hope that they'll taste and see that it is good and they'll go on and take a next step.
I mean, I love that idea. You said earlier, don't invite them to group, invite them into a conversation. I think that's great. Yeah. Really like that. Another question, really granular question from Sarah here. What do you do when you're on a Zoom call and you nearly didn't make it onto this call because you had a storm and your Wi-Fi got knocked out? What do you do how do you cope when, the computer crashes and the Wi-Fi drops out because someone unplugs it to plug in something else?
I think that's when you do go back to the archaic cell phone. I can't believe we're even talking about that, but using other technology that is still readily available, or the landline if you have that, but still there's ways to connect. We have FaceTime on our phones, and so sometimes you can use FaceTime as part of a connection, but when I have connection issues, and we do, this time of year is bad storm year. We're transitioning from winter to spring. So we have tornadoes and everything else coming through. And it's the time where we have plan B, and plan B is always the cell line or the landline.
Yeah. Pushing the conversation slightly differently now. Again, one of the things that's impressed me a lot about your church is when kids come to church in your younger groups and they move up to be teenagers and they get into the student groups and things like that, being part of a small group, being part of a small community is part of the DNA of all your kids ministry and all your student ministry as well. So that as they go on to become adults, it's second nature for them to want to get into a group. I remember when I first came to your church, I asked somebody, I couldn't understand why you'd had carpet in the room and the carpet had circles on it. I said, well, that's not particularly attractive. And you went, no. When it comes to group time, half the time is on stage, half the time is in group. And when it comes to group time, they sit in their little circles. and it's part and parcel of what you do. So group has become a natural part of kids working together. And I was on a call yesterday with a guy from Orange, and he was talking about how lots and lots of churches are struggling to connect with kids. They can connect with teenagers because teenagers are all over technology, but they can't connect to kids because parents are the gateway to kids, and parents are frazzled trying to homeschool their kids and work at the same time. And he said, but if the kids are used to being in a small group, they want to connect with their small group leader. So how do you connect? How do you go about connecting kids into small groups, and for that matter, students into small group as well?
Sure. So on Sunday mornings, typical rhythm is they come in, they'll do a little, and let's say these are 6-year-olds to 11-year-olds, 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds. They'll come in, they'll have a little connection time, then they'll go in, do music. There'll be a short lesson, and then they'll come back and they'll have a little bit of age-appropriate conversation and craft that goes around it. And, they're making something that they'll end up taking home to mom and dad, who will eventually throw it away. But it is still a meaningful exercise for them to go through. But literally from 3 to 30, we want their experience to be, we learn, apply. We learn, discuss, apply. And that's kind of the rhythm that we want people and those kids to get into. And of course, it's bite-sized and it's age-appropriate for them. But there's music, there is teaching, there's a passage, and then there's conversation, and in their case, craft. And we've asked our small group leaders for a 1-year commitment, and then but tell them on the front side, we would love for you to stay with your age group through elementary age. And I'll tell you, about 70% of the time that happens. So for example, when our daughter was growing up in our kids ministry, she had the same 2 small group leaders for 5 years. And you can imagine the level of relationship and excitement that happens in church when you see your small group leader who you've had 3 to 5 years of relationship with. So now those leaders are doing digital calls with their kids. And so they're staying connected. They're writing notes. There is a constant, frequent activity, but it is just normal activity for them because, they're talking to their small group leader who they talk to every week. And students, when we get into high school especially, it's obviously more elective than mom and dad brought me. And so, again, we try to, through our high school years, make sure that we are connecting people, and about 60 to 70% of the time, they have the same small group leaders for the 4 years of high school. I can't tell you the difference that makes when they go on retreat or they go on to summer camp and they have that small group leader who goes with them. The level of knowledge, understanding, and having another adult speaking into their life in a meaningful way is just gold. And so, again, it's been part of our overall strategy on a regular basis. Right now, we had to scramble, and we've actually created online content for kids. And so that has been something that we have scrambled and done, and is available on our some of our sites. But I think the key is we've thought through the content, and we've made it and put it in bite-sized pieces. But one of the things that is, I think, a secret sauce is the duration of those leaders staying with their small groups, because they know them, and they're the secondary most important person in their life after their parents, which is pretty fun to watch. So when they get baptized, who do they want there? In some cases, the small group leader actually baptizes them. And that makes it all even more exciting.
Bill, you talked about that being the secret sauce, and I totally agree with you. That's a great way of saying it. I mean, I was, interestingly, I was talking to, when I was last at North Point, talking to one of your kids' small group leaders. And I said, so what's your job description? What's expected of you? And he went, simple. And he was my age. He was in his 50s. He said, it was simple. He said, all they have asked me to do is to show up. They said to come for a year, but I've stayed for the whole of the term that the kids are here. So they said, all I need to do is to show up, to shut up. I'm not here to teach. I'm just here to create conversation with the material, because the teachers do the teaching in the session. I'm just here to create some conversation. Show up, shut up, and get to know the parents. And of course, when pandemic life comes, when you've got, I've been on lots of calls with some of our kids directors, and they're really struggling to get through to parents, because they're just sending emails out, here's some material, and the parents are ignoring it. But if your small group leader, who's there when you get baptized, if your small group leader puts a call into the home and says, hey, I just want to have a little chat with Sarah or whoever,
that's right,
they're going to jump all over that, because they've shown up, they've shut up, they've just created some conversation, and they've got to know mum and dad. So mum and dad are shouting, hey, Sarah, it's your small group leader, come and have a call. So I just want to endorse that, this idea of getting kids workers in particular, getting to know parents, I think is so important. We've got a couple minutes left, and there's a couple of questions just jumped in that I want to throw to you, Bill. We're getting a lot more people watching our services, and I think it's true with North Point as well, a lot more people watching our services. Sometimes it's only 13, 14 minutes of it, but they are engaging with our service online who would never walk in the doors of our church. How do you go about connecting those into a small group? I mean, how are North Point advertising group life on their live stream, on their YouTube channel on a Sunday?
We probably have not done as good a job as it relates to leveraging the weekend, because we've really tried to be focused. I mean, we just came out of Easter. We were doing a series that was leading up to it, and doing a pastoral moment on the front of our service as it related to the pandemic. So doing that pastoral moment, worship, teaching, one thing we've tried to do is to create shorter services. And so we are digitally going more in the 45 to 50 minute range than our usual hour and 5 minutes, which is typically what we do. And so, but we've been leveraging database for those that we know who are disconnected more than we've been leveraging the airwaves. And part of that is because we are, half of the people who tune in with us online are outside of our footprint and geographic area. And so we just, we don't want to chase down too many people that we can't lead to embodied community eventually. And so we really haven't done that good of a job, I don't think, leveraging that at this point, but going forward, hopefully we can.
Okay, that's helpful. Claire's asked a question about, when you create these new online groups, how do you get people to open up, to feel comfortable enough to open up? I mean, it's hard enough when they're sat in your living room. It takes quite a long time, but when you've just got an hour-long call and you're on Zoom, what are some of the tips and tricks to get people to go beyond talking about the football and the weather and everything else, and get them to actually be honest about life?
Yeah, I always say the speed of the leader is the speed of the team. And so the authenticity and transparency of the leader will translate, I think, into the rest of the group. And I think group can be 3 meaningful questions. And if the leader leads in such a way that they're leading not as the expert, but if they're leading as somebody who's in this with them and is sharing openly and authentically and transparently, it does something to the rest of the group. And again, I want to make sure it's got to be authentic. It doesn't need to be staged. People can smell it if it's forced. But at the same time, I think the leader leads the way. And I think open-ended questions, again, the key is open-ended questions, not yes and no questions, but open-ended questions promote dialogue and discussion. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move people down a communication continuum from where they're interfacing with facts, and they're moving towards feelings. And, it's easy for me to state facts. The weather is bad today, but moving that to the weather is bad and it is affecting me XYZ is where we want, because we want to know them, not their answer, the right answer.
Yeah.
We want them.
Yeah, that's helpful, Bill. Listen, our time is really nearly through. 60 seconds left, and I want you to talk into Regroup. Regroup was a life changer for me when I came, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, just unpacking how North Point, the strategy that North Point use to connect people from that kind of front door experience right into the kitchen, so they become not just guests, but family, and get them into small groups. Regroup was life-changing. One of the best 2 days conference I've ever done. You're doing it differently this year, and just talk into it, because I think the other thing about Regroup is I can't believe how much you're charging for it. It's so ridiculously cheap for a conference like this. It's almost like you're giving it away. So yeah, would you talk into that and how we can access that? Because I think our guys would. It's very accessible, very affordable, and if it's anything like the hour we've spent together, it's going to be incredibly useful as well.
Well, I think for us, we've done it 7 years, and it was a two-day conference, and it was an opportunity for us to do main sessions and then a bunch of breakouts. People chose the breakouts, and it was a great, meaningful experience. But this last year, talking with our partner team, we started thinking differently and saying, hey, what if we did a digital conference rather than doing a live embodied conference? And how providential has that decision become? And so those wheels were turning. And what we've tried to do is create an opportunity for attendees to create their own conference experience. And so from July 13th through the 26th, people will have access to content, and for in about 105 different breakouts. And so what they can do is they can piece together their own conference for what serves them best. There are some main session pieces to it, and there's a lot of breakouts and a lot of conversations around topics that are invaluable around spiritual formation, around group life, around care issues, around leader development issues. So for $20 a person, in essence, you have access to all this content, and it allows you to be able to fine tune it and use it the way you want to on the day you want to. And so if you want to do it in a small group of staff, you can do it that way. If you want to do it with a group of leaders, you can do it that way. But what we tried to do is put the keys in the hands of the attendee rather than us as the hosts, so that you can really create your own conference experience as much as possible.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I've put the link in the chat there, guys. I mean, $20 is incredible. And if Donald Trump stays on the throne for much longer, that could be even cheaper for us, because I reckon he's going to tank your economy anyway in the next few months. So is that too political? No, probably is. Let's scratch that. But I'm not going to draw you, am I? but it's
you know what, you can think anything. You shouldn't say everything, and that's what I'm just trying to operate out of.
We've got our own blonde bombshell in number 10, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. So yeah, $20 is about £16. So for all that material, that's incredible. So people can dive onto that. The links there. I'm having a conversation next Wednesday. I'll email this out to everybody. But I'm having a conversation with Dave Adamson from North Point and your worship leader, Bill, Brett Stanfill.
Oh, good.
We're gonna have a conversation around online worship. Can you still worship God in your PJs with a bowl of cornflakes and a cup of coffee? How do you create spiritual connection moments, God connection moments? We kind of know how to do it in church, but how do you do it on YouTube so that people can still connect? So we're going to talk about that next Wednesday at 11 a.m. But I'll send all the links, all the details out to everybody who's been on this call. because I've got your emails. And over the next few months, we just want to be helpful. We are not putting on any webinars to say, this is what you must do. We're creating conversations with people like Bill just to say, here are some questions you guys might want to ask at this time. So please hear our heart on this. We want to be generous and we want to be personal, and we just, more than anything else, want to be helpful. So thank you so much for joining our little band of troops this afternoon. I hope it has been helpful. Looking at the chat, Bill, they love you and they're really grateful, and they all want you to come and pastor their churches. And we all want to be part of your small group. We'd love you to be our small group leader. It would be excellent. Yeah, really appreciate that. So thanks ever so much, Bill. And I'm sure we'll try and dive in and have another conversation with you in the future.
My pleasure, Duncan. And as I'm looking at the faces, I see a lot of familiar faces. So it's great to see you, and God bless you. We'll get through this together. And honestly, we're going to learn a ton, and just keep writing down those notes as to what you're learning along the way. And let's be a better version of ourselves a year from now than we are today.
Amen. Yeah. That's a whole nother conversation. What does life look like after lockdown? Yeah, maybe we need to do that soon. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Mr. Willits, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you all real soon. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks, friends.
Thanks, Bill.
Yes, Duncan.